down. We survived. Another week. My hair's a little longer. It only looks this way because I actually comb it now. Because I'm on video and don't worry, Flyers fans. It's a dead penguin. It's not an actual Penguins T-shirt. Welcome to HIAC Wrestling Podcast. Um, I guess we're going to talk about Dark Side of the Ring here. Of course, the wrestling historian. But we made it another week. Both Craig and I were. Hey, how are you feeling, Craig? You feeling good?
I'm in fine fettle, Dan. I've never felt fettler. So
Never felt Fetler.
never felt fettler. I'm in fine fettle, as I used to say. Living the dream. Living the dream. Being the severe introvert that I am, being told to stay home and not going anywhere is
Oh,
exactly what I wanted my entire adult life. So I could
yes.
not be happier. Even happier still that I get to do this podcast every week with you. We get to discuss our favorite sport every week this week, and because just wrestling, just like the mail, continues no
Yes, sir.
matter who's around. And while we may be performing to empty rooms right now, like our wrestling counterparts, the show must go on. So here we are. Thank you for having me again, Dan. Amber's, as usual, excited to be here. So, what do you want to talk about first?
I got the exclusive on Craig since Comic Book Gurus is on Best ofs. I have the exclusive now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The only podcast in town, the only podcast I will do is this one, HIAC Talk Radio Wrestling, baby. That's what it's all about.
Follow me at DanLaw83. Craig is at Craig Lagans. It's not that hard. So yes, this last I tell you, this last week, Dark Side of the Ring aired, and wow. I mean, what? First of all, hashtag stay home.
Yeah,
Right at the bottom of the screen there. Um, what a first of all, digging all that up again as wrestling fans, not even remotely connected to it outside of the fandom, but extremely well done. Rev said it is a dream to have Craig follow me on Twitter. Well, I'll give him the Twitter account, and hopefully he'll take a look there. I'll take care of that dream for you, buddy.
thank you, Rev.
Um, yeah, there's a couple revelations on there. I did not know. I'm not going to get into the night itself or the 3 days itself, but
Hmm.
hardcore details on what he actually did, past what you read in the news. The WWE really, really, really did David Benoit dirty, man.
Yeah, and a lot of people did. For those of you who aren't who don't follow, the premiere of Dark Side of the Ring occurred last night as we're recording this Tuesday night, and it was a 2 hour premiere, season two premiere, and
Yeah,
it talked about the life and death of Chris Benoit.
yeah,
Something that you know for the WWE, for all intents and purposes, Chris Benoit does no longer exists. His name is never spoken. He is the Baltimore professional wrestling. He who shall not be named.
it's true.
But this documentary revealed a whole lot, and again, like you said, Dan, stuff I never heard before, and and from people that knew him more than
Yeah,
anything, that aren't under the
yeah,
direct thumb of the WWE, and not just people that knew him, people that were close to him, like Chavo Guerrero, like Chris Jericho, like Jim Ross. Um, and I firmly believe if they all three were still employed by the WWE, they wouldn't say anything. Um,
oh sure, no,
yeah, so just having this documentary itself, I mean, just the fact that there is a documentary about the life and death of Chris Benoit is quite the achievement because it's 13 years since it happened.
13
Uh,
years.
13 years, and when he died in 2007, which was the biggest thing in the world. It wasn't just in professional wrestling, but this was national world news, and the internet was in its infancy then. So we really just had speculation and word of mouth. So the stuff that we saw, even been down to the sheriff who actually went into the home. This is the
Yeah,
first
that
time I ever
was
heard from him. That was very revealing, very telling. The police footage, the photos from the house, what they found, and I never knew exactly how Chris Benoit
Did the
did
deal?
it,
Yeah.
did the deal to himself and to his family. So that was very chilling to hear, and just what the sister of Nancy and the first son of Chris Benoit, both done incredibly dirty. Uh, David Benoit, who was like Chavo said in the documentary, if you haven't seen it, please see it. A complete innocent, but was raked over the coals, bullied, cyber bullied, named called for for something that was absolutely he had nothing to do with. He was the firstborn son of Chris Benoit for a previous marriage, and just to have the last name, it's like being born Vic Hitler. Like you just say that wasn't me, you know.
No, it was my
And
brother.
yeah, but it just sucks just having that, just being associated by why you're painted with that brush,
Yeah.
and especially for someone like David Benoit who loves wrestling, because of his dad, because of his stepmom, and what's not to love? That's what he grew up loving because of his father. And so he shouldn't watch wrestling anymore, or he shouldn't be associated with it anymore. So uh
One of the one of the things I found fascinating, the good thing about this documentary, and Rev, don't be scared to watch it. Please do.
yes,
Yes,
please.
of course they focus on the Chris Benoit. Um, part one is a lot. A lot of it is um, a biography about him getting into wrestling and up through the ranks,
Hmm.
WCW, and back over into the WWF, WWE later on. But it also focuses once the incident. What word do you? Once the murder happens,
Yeah. Hmm.
focuses on the people that were left behind instead of like the Ted. There's a. It's a great documentary, but there's a documentary on Netflix about Ted Bundy. It focuses on Ted Bundy. There's
Right.
very few documentaries that are like the victims. It's all about, hey, Ted was charismatic. They don't go this way with it.
Mm-mm.
It's very matter of fact as far as Chris Benoit, but it focuses on the people who are affected by it, who are still around. Woman's
Yeah.
sister, Nancy's sister,
Hmm.
Chris Jericho, David Benoit, Chavo.
Yeah.
That reopening the Eddie Guerrero wound. I
Yeah.
had no idea that Eddie was alive at first. When
Hmm.
spoiler alert, I don't know why I say spoiler alert. When Chavo got into the hotel room, but that he died in Chavo's arms, and that's like their nephew and uncle. But that's
Yeah.
more Chavo and Eddie were more brother than
They were only 2 years apart.
yeah. So
You
like
know.
by birth it's his nephew, but by right it was his brother. It just
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I known that Chava was the one that found him. I didn't know that Chava was the last one that Eddie made a sound
yeah,
when he
yeah.
got to him. That I did know. And I also, Dan, when we're talking about Chris Benoit, then went right into Eddie Guerrero. And it's like I knew they were close, but I had no idea
Oh yeah.
that Eddie's death would be such a trigger for Chris Benoit that would start his downward spiral. Something that Chris Jericho, who was close to both of them, actually admitted.
It's weird. It's weird. It's interesting because you know nobody here on the show is going to celebrate Chris Benoit. Um, and let me just say this: you can say what a performer he was in the wrestling ring, and have that be totally separate about the diabolical s he did to Nancy and Daniel. I'll put that out there. Not ashamed of
Mm,
saying that. He was one of the greatest. That doesn't take away from what he did, and he took Nancy and Daniel off this earth. What I find it's not black and white. This is not
mm,
black and white. He was angry. There's so many things that was going on with that guy, physically and mentally. The mental. illness, the CTE, the trauma came from Eddie. It's all contributing factor. It is not just one thing. I saw a lot of people who I see often cutting this down as a black and white issue on Twitter after seeing it, and it's not. It's just not. It's terrible, and I feel. What's also touched upon about on the documentary, Craig, is as something you and I have talked about through Wrestling Historian. Woman
Mhm.
was probably the best, if not close to the best, in of what she did, and
Yes.
Jericho put a stamp on that. And he made a very good point because once she retired, that role left. It went
Mhm.
away after Woman was no more.
Yeah.
Um, but also the stuff with Kevin Sullivan
Hmm.
that I did not know about. I've heard stories about the end of his and Woman's relationship.
Hmm.
I didn't hear that. I mean,
No.
I heard rumors, but it was more or less confirmed, and it's just an eye opening. I'll get to my final point after that, but the whole Kevin Sullivan Woman thing was also very, very, very eye opening, Craig.
That it was. And he was the only one. He honestly was the one I wanted to hear from the most. Kim, because I went in when I found out he wasn't on it because of the abuse claims. That's when well, he's not going to, because he claims there was no abuse. There's enough evidence to state that there was, and
There's police reports.
police reports, yes, and
I mean,
firsthand accounts from Dee Malenko's wife. Um, yeah, and it makes me further feel for Nancy, who was involved in two physically abusive relationships, the way we see at the end. But Kevin was a an integral part in this. The irony, he booked his own divorce. Um, but he was someone that, again, not to a lesser extent with Chris Benoit, you can't overlook how great Kevin Sullivan has been in the wrestling business as far as a booker and as a visionary and intelligence, and how he sees wrestling and how he puts wrestlers in the best possible positions. That angle made Chris Benoit a star.
sure,
Um, it put him in the forefront.
sure.
He obviously saw something in Chris, but that we all saw, that despite the NWO and the Goldberg and Sting and all the big guys, he knew that you put Chris Benoit on a great program, the fans are going to see, the mainstream fans are going to see what we already knew, that he was one of the best in the biz.
Yeah.
Um, but he's not absolved in this either.
No,
He was a
not
contributing
now.
factor to this, but which is a shame.
Not
Because
that it's
you know
not.
what,
Go ahead.
yeah, the ironic thing, Dan, I've seen when I lived in Florida, I saw Kevin Sullivan abuse women on television more than I ever thought he did
Yeah,
in private. I thought because the angle he did with Luna Vachon before she was Luna Vachon, he slapped her right in the face when
yeah,
she was giving an award to Kendall Windham. I mean, sorry, to Eddie Graham, the blackjack
yeah. It's not the
in
same guy.
Kendall Windham. He took another one and slapped her across the face. That's what turned Billy Graham face when Billy Graham was in Florida, because Kevin just one of his Adams family dark forces by the hair and slapped her in the face on camera. This is during a Saturday, afternoon. Um, but I never believed it. I thought, oh, he was just being his character, but apparently that was something that was in his wheelhouse, was to
Actually, hit
abuse.
women.
Yeah, actually do hit women.
I mean, at that point,
But
you're on the same level as Sammy Callahan, and
yeah,
to me, I'm a
yeah,
nobody, so it doesn't matter what I think. But I'm just saying
yeah.
well, that's over.
The same Jimmy Snuka, all those, in the past, which is a shame,
It's
because
so funny. Sidebar about Sammy Callahan,
yeah.
real quick, dude.
Hmm. Hmm.
Remember last time Harry was on, he was talking about how Impact is the only show he watches, Rosemary, and there's a few other he likes. He goes, and I said to him, I can't watch it because of what's his name. And he goes, well, he hasn't been on in a while, so go ahead and watch it. The week, Craig, the week that I watch Impact, that mother effer came back on TV, and I immediately, it's like,
Oh,
son of a
jeez.
bitch. God damn it. I immediately turned it off again. I couldn't believe it.
Just
I,
when you thought it was safe to go back to the impact zone.
I was so mad. I texted Harry. I said, God damn it, Harry. Anyway,
You set
um,
me up.
the the final point I wanted to bring up, because I don't want to talk about it that much. I just want to encourage people, because whatever idea you think you have, no, the impact zone is never safe. Whatever idea you think you have or you think you know about the whole thing, I promise you, you don't.
Yeah.
And I really encourage everybody to watch it. And I give a little bit of things, a little bit away here, because it's not a movie. It's not like, oh, the big ending. Um,
Mm.
when David started breaking when David started breaking down, Chavo was there,
Yeah.
and his aunt was there.
Yeah.
That broke my heart in a good. I was
It
like,
did.
oh, they that's the thing. They hooked back up. And then you find out Chris Jericho is the one that got them back together. Was like
Right.
in the shadow of all of this, at the very least, they got back together after all these years, because the family told both of them that neither one of them wanted to have
When it
anything
had
to do
anything
with
to
each
do with
other.
it with each
Yeah,
other.
and it
Yeah.
was all a lie, because there was a lot of emotion. I'm not judging the family, but there is
Hmm.
a lot of crap going on. But I'm very happy they're back together, as a family.
Yeah, that was the light at the end of the tunnel because these are two innocents. Chris Benoit's firstborn son and Nancy's sister. Um, Neither one of them had anything to do with their. He lost his father. She lost her only sister. Um, there's no reason for them to ever be estranged from one another because neither one of them had anything to do with the actions of a madman, and an answer that we'll never get. We'll never know what happened in those 2 days or what led up to that. Or you can blame it on the CTE, you can blame it on the unheard of levels of testosterone that Chris Benoit had, but we'll never know. All we know is that three people are dead for no reason, and that's what we have to live with. And that's what these two individuals have been living with for
Yeah,
13 years. So they don't deserve any type of vitriol or any type of resentment or any type of anything being connected. And these are people that they've loved their whole lives and love them. So I was also telling was I don't know if you heard, and I'm not stepping out on you, Dan, but I heard
go ahead.
another podcast on Bully Ray's podcast
How
on
dare you?
uh, but David Benoit was a guest on there, and
Oh
Bully
wow.
came right, and they because this was on the day that the Dark Side of the Ring premiered,
Right.
and they talked about him being at the AEW event as a guest of Chris Jericho, and they asked, "Did you enjoy it?" He goes, "Oh man, I loved it, and it was just it's my first time, and in however many years I actually been to a live event." And Bully came right out and asked him. Um, did do you want to wrestle? And Dave said, yeah.
Of course I do.
This is what I've known my entire life, and obviously acknowledging what a huge, incredible uphill battle it will be, um, to be a professional wrestler, even if your name was John Smith, especially at this day and age, but to be named David Benoit, um, and even harder. But I thought that was very telling and just uh, a very hopeful thing. And I obviously I want anyone to have their dream, but for David Benoit, it would be just maybe the feel good story of the millennium. But
I'm glad you brought that up, because that was going to be my last point. You were talking about people giving David crap online, and throwing insults and judging. At the beginning of the year, I remember, I think it was beginning of this year. It's all blending in now more than it ever has. Um,
yeah, this whole month has been a year.
yeah, yeah. It's been two. What? What? Um, so earlier this year, David said he wanted to use Chris Benoit Jr. as his wrestling name.
Hmm.
And
I
it's
didn't
like,
know that.
yeah, yeah. And of course, everybody who is not connected to the Benoit family at all had something to say about it on
Hmm.
Twitter.
Yeah.
And it's like, you don't get to tell him. No,
Hmm.
that's not how that works. Do I think it's a great idea? No, because I think it'll hurt his chances if he has any
Hmm.
more than it would help. However, it's his. I don't know, man. That's his dad. You
Yeah.
know, like
Yeah.
everybody was like, "Yeah, David, you're an idiot." Okay, wait a minute. Hold
Mm.
on. What? Why do you? The internet's a funny place, man.
It it is.
I just thought that was terrible. He's caught so much flack just wanting to live his life,
Yeah.
and it shouldn't be defined on something else somebody else did.
No, and especially in the wrestling business more than ever, more than any place else, if you're the son of a famous wrestler, you've already got like almost depending on your dad, almost three strikes against you, you
Yeah.
know. Uh David Flair never got it. David San Martino never, got to that point. Ricky Steamboat's son. I mean, uh whether Wes Briscoe had a good start, but for every Randy Orton and Bray Wyatt, there's a David San Martino and a David Flair. Uh, it, my point is, it's hard enough being the son of a famous wrestler, more so than in any sport. Michael Jordan's kid played basketball and then he stopped and it didn't make the papers. Wasn't national news. Michael Jordan's son isn't anywhere near as good as his dad.
No.
He played high school, he played college ball, and then now he works in real estate. Period. He's living his life. Yeah, I'm Michael Jordan's son. Yeah, I play basketball, and I'm done. And but Chris Benoit's son, or any of the famous sons want to come out and wrestle, we're gonna know all about it. Everywhere he went, how did he do? Oh, he looks terrible. His dad would have done this, or he didn't look anything like. I felt for David Flair. I felt for David San Martino. They had unreal shoes to fill. Bob Orton Jr. was good, but if Randy Orton was a dud, I wouldn't say, well, we're doing as good as dad. That wasn't as Bob Orton as good as he was. It wasn't if Randy Orton didn't turn out to be anything, it's like, okay, well, look at what his dad was, look at what his grandfather was. But
Dang, what you trying to say?
yeah, I'm saying that uh, Bob Orton Jr. is a Hall of Fame wrestler, but not because of his achievements. It's because he was just damn good in the ring. He was solid wrestling, not Hall of Fame worthy, but he was just a damn good. Obviously, Randy's better than both his dad and his granddad ever was. But if he fell short, it wouldn't have been what a huge king size disappointment. Not like David Flair did or David San Martino did. Same thing with if Rocky Johnson, who I'm going to get to in a wrestling historian,
No.
if Rocky Maivia never took off, it's like, okay, well, hey, you gave it a try, kid. And the way he started off, it's like, okay, well, he's going to be another David Flair. It's like he looks good, and folks are, you know, it was like a Mike Von Erich. They were carrying him everywhere, but
Oh,
he
all
wasn't.
right. Jesus.
But again, that's another example.
Yeah, yeah. At least it wasn't Lance.
Yeah,
That doesn't count.
yeah. He was also in my upcoming wrestling
my
historian.
my point is leave David alone.
Yeah, that is the original point of this entire diatribe between both of us. Leave David Benoit alone, please. There's nothing you can say to him that can cause him any more pain than he's already felt in his life.
It's got you
Seriously.
got
So
nothing for him, pals.
exactly. So you please do not waste your time on giving it or saying something he's never heard before. He's had 13 years of this crap. Okay.
He's already at the finish line of pain and grief before you got there.
Yeah.
Most of you, anyway.
most
And I've
people.
talked about it so much. I've alluded to it already enough. So let's just get into it. Daniel and the
Yeah.
rest of the HIAC Talk Radio Professional Wrestling listening audience, please come back with me to a time where you can call a title a belt, when you can use the word hospital instead of medical facility, when you can say a title shot is what you deserve, and when fans were called fans and not the universe, when territories ruled the United States, Dan, this is what's called the wrestling historian. I'm going to go back to March 19th, Dan, and this whole segment of this particular edition of Wrestling Historian is going to be kind of a theme. I want you to see if you can catch it. Okay. So we're going to go back to March 19th, 1995, Dan. WCW's first uncensored pay-per-view.
Ugh.
Uh, known for probably known for the Dustin Rhodes Blacktop Bully King
Ugh.
of the Road match. Um, there were both men, Blacktop Bully, also known as Repo Man, also known as Smash, also known as Crusher Khrushchev, also known as Crusher Darso, also known as Barry Darso. Um, went up against Dustin Rhodes in the back of an 18-wheel truck in a match that felt like it lasted 48 minutes.
Dude, it really does.
But lasted. But the thing is, Dan, it was edited. They filmed the match 2 days earlier, and they played it during the pay-per-view. But for some reason, it just kept going and going. But that wasn't even the main event. The main event was Hulk Hogan versus Big Van Vader in a strap match. And because neither one wanted to job to the other, Ric Flair somehow got involved. Hulk Hogan put the strap on Ric Flair, dragged Ric Flair to all four corners, and Hulk Hogan won the match. So that was the main event of the first WCW uncensored pay-per-view. Cut to March 19th, 2000, the same date, 5 years later, Dan.
Oh no.
We come to the WCW sixth and final uncensored pay-per-view.
For the best, really.
And the main event of that match, Hulk Hogan defeated Ric Flair in a strap match.
Oh, the yappa pie.
So exactly 5 years to the day, in the same date, March 19th, 1995, the first uncensored pay-per-view, and 2000, the last uncensored pay-per-view. And to give you a little indication of how far they fell, the first WCW uncensored pay-per-view did a 0.96 buy rate. The last WCW uncensored pay-per-view 5 years later did a 0.13.
And I was the 0.3.
But yeah, the two WCW uncensored pay-per-views 5 years apart took place March 19th, 1995 and 2000, respectively.
Just reading the rest of this card and
For
sure.
which one? Okay, both eminently forgettable.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was crazy that the March 19th bookended both WCW's uncensored.
That was the first time in my life when Flair and Hogan were running that top program in the year 2000. And it was like, why? That was the first time I was like, why are these guys still doing this? Let's go. Move on. Come on.
And they would, and they will. Because this week in pro wrestling history was a year of historic firsts. March 20th, Dan.
Oh.
I want you to stay with me because March 20th, we're just going to stay in one spot. This may be the first in the whole history of the wrestling historian. Okay, but we're going to stay in one spot. March 20th, 1978. Madison Square Garden.
Oh.
This was the rematch between the newly crowned WWF Heavyweight Champion Bob Backlund against the man he beat, Superstar Billy Graham, in the main event. And Graham would win that bout because Backlund was too bloody to continue. On that same card, the undercard, and this was got me 12-year-old, well, 11-year-old me, the wrestling fan, going nuts because on that undercard of Bob Backlund and superstar Billy Graham, Andre the Giant, Dusty Rhodes, and Mil Mascaras teamed up to go up against Ken Patera and Mr. Fuji and Professor Tanaka. This was in every wrestling magazine, just a picture of those three guys, the three biggest box office draws that weren't world champions. Andre, Dusty Rhodes, and Mil Mascaras on the same team at the same time in the same ring in Madison Square Garden. 11-year-old me was going crazy. I had pictures of all those three on my wall in different matches. Andre, Dusty, and Mil Mascaras. And they all came from different parts of the country to be at Madison Square Garden. Remember I told you Madison Square Garden, you never knew what you're going to get.
No.
But March 20th, 1978, main event, Bob Backlund versus superstar Billy Graham. Backlund was the WWF champion, and undercard, Andre the Giant, Dusty Rhodes, and Mil Mascaras on the same side. March 20th, 1983, 5 years later, Madison Square Garden, sold out. The undercard, the main event was Bob Backlund, WWF Heavyweight Champion, who beat the Intercontinental Champion, Magnificent Morocco. On the undercard, Andre the Giant, Jimmy Snuka, and Rocky Johnson took on Big John Studd and the Samoans.
Ooh.
Just like it was 5 years earlier, Madison Square Garden sold out.
Of course.
Bob Backlund, the champion, Andre on the undercard, teaming up as Jimmy Snuka and Rocky Johnson, the two biggest stars in the WWF at the time, against Big John Studd and the Samoans. The very next year, March 20th, 1984, Madison Square Garden, sold out. Andre the Giant and Jimmy Snuka took on Roddy Piper and Dr. D. David Schultz.
No.
Now, in this match, Roddy and Dr. D ganged up on Andre and bloodied him. And Andre had to be taken in the back because he was a bloody mess. And Jimmy Snuka said, yeah, bloodied Andre. And Jimmy Snuka helped him back and came back and said he would take on Roddy Piper and David Schultz in a handicap match. So it was declared a handicap match. Jimmy was doing okay, but then he got double teamed, and Andre came back with his head bandaged and beat the living snot out of both Roddy Piper and Dr. D. David Schultz. But because the match was a handicap match, Andre interfered, so it was a disqualification. So Roddy Piper and Dr. D. David Schultz defeated Jimmy Snuka by disqualification. And on the undercard, Bob Backlund took on Greg Valentine in a double countout. So once again, Andre, Bob Backlund, and Madison Square Garden sold out. 10 years later, Dan.
Oh, but it gets better.
But there's more. But wait, there's more. March 20th, 1994. Remember I said March 20th, 1984. March 20th, 1994. WrestleMania 10. Guess where?
Madison Square Garden.
And it was sold out, Dan. But the bad news, no Andre, no Bob Backlund, but we did have WrestleMania 10. Owen Hart defeated Bret Hart.
Hell yeah.
And later on, Bret Hart defeated Yokozuna to become the WWF Heavyweight Champion. Also, Burt Reynolds was a ring announcer. Afterwards, being interviewed by a young Scottish, what was it? Johnny Polo.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, I know where this is going.
Polo Fever, catch it. Other ring announcers were Donnie Wahlberg, Jenny Garth. But the match that everyone was talking about that night, March 20th, 1994, WrestleMania 10, the first ever ladder match for the Intercontinental title. Shawn Michaels versus Razor Ramon.
The blueprint of what ladder matches are to this day started
Yeah,
there. And I also want to make, man, I just want to say, people were trying to make uh, Scotty Flamingo, Scotty Polo, Johnny Polo, Raven a mouthpiece for years before he finally hit something. I mean, it was in world class, in WWF,
yeah,
at first in WCW. It was just wow.
yeah. But Johnny Polo, my favorite was he interviewed Burt Reynolds afterwards, and after the confetti falling, everything, it's the best ever, and said, "And Burt, no, it's the best ever." And and Scott Levy, Raven, to his credit, when he was asked, when you were Johnny Polo, why didn't you wrestle? Because back then, when he was a commentator, he was in the office with Shane like every day. He was a company man.
Yeah.
But when he was asked, how come you didn't wrestle? Because up till then he had been Scotty Flamingo, he had been Scotty the Body in Memphis,
Scotty
and
the Body.
he was Scotty Anthony in Global Wrestling Federation. He carved out a wrestling career for himself, and asked, "Why didn't you wrestle when you were in the WWF?" And he said very clearly, "I wasn't on steroids. I was under 200. I was under 200 pounds." He said, "I was 185. I was, you know, I didn't touch it. I
Good
was in the
point.
office every day." And he said, "But that's why." But interesting things that came out of that match, and not just because that ladder match, like you said very astutely, what all ladder matches are based on. And even when Razor and Shawn tried to do it again in
Nope.
Survivor Series a year later, didn't work.
Nope.
But the that was to many what WrestleMania 3 was to so many wrestling fans and wrestlers, that's the match that made me want to be a wrestler. WrestleMania 10, ladder match between Scott Hall and Razor Ramon, rather, and Shawn Michaels is what made this current generation of wrestling fans want to be wrestlers. That was the first one they'd seen. And what made it even more incredible that what those two did was there was only one ladder uh, in the
That's true.
match.
Yeah.
So if it broke, if it did whatever, that was it. They had no backup. Now in every professional wrestling match in the WWE, there's at least 5 to 10 ladders under the ring at any time that can be dragged out and used, you know, um, ad nauseum. But the ladder match between Razor Ramon and Scott and Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 10, there was only one ladder. Also, might have been lost in the shuffle during that match, during that WrestleMania 1994. Uh, Shawn Michaels' bodyguard, Diesel. That was Kevin Nash's first WrestleMania. Ironic because Diesel, the man who had no match, who was sent to the back during that ladder match, never to be seen again. That was his first WrestleMania. And he didn't even wrestle. He would headline the following year's WrestleMania. Uh, Also, the dark match was the Bushwhackers defeated the Heavenly Bodies, and that would be Jim Cornette's first WrestleMania.
Oh, that's
And
right.
yeah, and also on the undercard, Randy Savage defeated Crush, and that would be Randy Savage's last
Last match. Yeah.
WrestleMania. Um, Another one, that was I told you it was Diesel's first WrestleMania. It was Jim Cornette's first WrestleMania. Uh, and Randy Savage's last WrestleMania, but WrestleMania 10 was the first WrestleMania without Hulk Hogan.
Huh.
And
Didn't even occur to me.
yeah,
Yeah,
he
that's
had
right.
headline he had headlined the first 9, but this was the first one without him, and may have been at the time may have been the best WrestleMania from top to bottom. Um, and proving that life without Hogan can go on. But all that happened March 20th, and this is the first wrestling historian I've ever done where every date was in the same place, a
Wow.
sold
Yeah.
out Madison Square Garden.
Jeez. Remember that
So
for next year.
Yeah, March 20th has been very good for Madison Square Garden.
Alright.
March 23rd, 1997. You notice the tone here. WrestleMania 13
Hmm.
in Chicago. A lot of
Chicago.
firsts here, Chicago. Uh, when the opening bout, Rocky Maivia defeated the Sultan, who we now know as Rikishi. And Rikishi was managed by both the Iron Sheik and Bob Backlund. There's that name again. Uh,
Hmm.
After the match was over, uh, the Sheik attacked Rocky Maivia, and he was saved by his dad, Rocky Johnson. And that would be the last, well, it'd be the first and last WrestleMania for Rocky Johnson. And that will be Rocky's first. He was Intercontinental Champion in his first WrestleMania.
I was gonna say,
So,
yeah, like
yeah,
people always like talk about how much of a flop Rocky Maivia was when he debuted, and that's true. However, he was Intercontinental Champion in his first
yeah,
WrestleMania. He was going to be a star if you damned him if you didn't.
yes. But that's when the booze first started, though. Dan was at this
Die, Rocky,
WrestleMania
die.
in Chicago. In Chicago, they're not quite Philly fans, but they're known to not like the faces as they should. Also on that card, that WrestleMania 13, Triple H defeated Goldust in what would be China's WrestleMania debut.
Nice.
Also, the WWF Tag Team Champions at the time, Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith, defeated the team of Vader and Mankind.
Huh.
Now, you recall last week's wrestling historian, I lamented the loss of Mick Foley's ear. Well, cut to a couple years later, Vader and Mankind are a tag team. And this would be Mankind's first WrestleMania. Obviously, the Vader Mankind tag team didn't stick, and I know the WWF wanted to reunite their feud, but it ended up not happening. But probably the most defining match of that night. It's weird these WrestleManias, they have their main events, but it's the match that wasn't the main event that turned out stealing the show. I mentioned WrestleMania 10, Razor and Shawn Michaels stole the show with the first ladder match. But in WrestleMania 13, the match that stole the night, still iconic, Bret Hart defeated Stone Cold Steve Austin. Ken Shamrock was the referee, Stone Cold coming in as the heel, Bret Hart as the stern babyface. And the rest is history.
If you haven't, what timing you have, sir? That's why you're a professional. If you haven't seen the Bret Hart Stone Cold Broken Skull sessions, I think it's what it's called.
Yeah.
Sure, it's the first
Mm-hmm.
one I've watched. They go real hardcore into that match,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that what I didn't know, call me a mark, I had no idea that it was 100% pre-planned. All of that, they went through it,
Yeah.
and that's insane to me. Knowing how that match ends, it was all planned. That was the match that where Vince calls Brett and goes, "I'm going to convince you to be a heel," and that was the match. And you could have fooled me because I had no idea. They talk about the blood. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that match. Brett said that in the interview. Brett says that if he sees a wrestling or if he sees a person that hasn't watched wrestling, that is one of the go-to matches he will go to say, "This is what we do," and he'll show him that match. It's so iconic now.
It is iconic now, and I just thought that was just the crowd, but now it was them
Yeah.
because that's what we talk about psychology, and we don't talk about it enough in professional wrestling now. But that's how you play a crowd. You work a crowd through psychology. The cheers that Bret Hart got coming into that match, and the boo that Steve Austin got before the match,
Mm.
and to see a crowd turn like that,
On a dime.
that's yeah, that's to the athletes' credit. I just said that the Chicago fans can be, they can turn on they'll boo faces, if they don't like they didn't what they saw in Rocky they didn't like, so they let them know. But with they were still Bret Hart fans.
Oh
But
yeah.
at the end of that match they weren't. Um, the iconic uh shot of Austin, in the sharpshooter with the blood trickling down his face and him not passing out from the pain, not giving up, just cemented him as a face. And some would say, I wouldn't say arguably, but this was the match, the Bret Hart versus Steve Austin match at WrestleMania 13 that saved the company.
Yeah. 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 I couldn't argue with you on that one, sir. No.
And it wasn't even the main event. The main event was the Undertaker, the winning the WWF Championship from Sid.
Who cares?
Yeah, and what even was even more careless was Brett came out afterwards and in full heel mode, and he got power bombed by Undertaker afterwards to the much to the delight of the crowd. But on commentary for that match, for the title match, was the man who lost his smile, Shawn Michaels, the one who wouldn't drop the belt to Brett in the first place, that caused all of this. But Shawn Michaels was doing commentary.
I don't even remember the Brett coming out at the end. No memory
Yeah,
of that whatsoever. That's very funny.
yeah. And that would also be Sid's last ever WrestleMania
Yeah.
match.
Well, also, what a shame.
Yeah, also what a shame. Speaking of shame, Dan, we're staying on this date, March 23rd. March 23rd, 1997 was WrestleMania 13, but March 23rd, 2001 was the day that the war ended
Mm-hmm.
because World Wrestling Federation Entertainment Inc. today announced its purchase of the World Championship Wrestling brand from Turner Broadcasting System. March 23rd, 2001, the WWE bought WCW.
I don't care. No, I'll never forget because it was still primitive internet in those days.
Yeah.
High speed was just beginning. Comcast at home, but we still had the computer in our house was my stepfather's IBM laptop that had a modem card that you plugged the phone line into on the card and hoped that it was in there good enough to get a connection. And 90% of the time it worked fine. So I knew there were rumors, but I never got the official word that it was over. They sold. WWE bought WCW. I had no idea. And I'll never forget the WCW logo, starts, fades right into Vince.
Yeah.
All right.
I
Young
guess I, I guess this is happening.
ran into the living room. Mom, Vince bought WCW. Oh, it's just a TV show. This is real, Mom.
What really grounded it to me, Dan, was when Vince was on Howard Stern. This is back uh, pre PPS, pre PNS. When
Yes.
he was on and Howard, who
Well,
knows absolutely, I was listening. Put it that way.
you weren't listening. No, I was going to say,
Yeah.
technically they were on, but that was the very beginnings of. I don't remember when PMS stopped. I don't know if it was 2001 or 2. That's the
Hmm.
only thing I cannot remember. I'm sorry, continue. Sorry, I was
Okay.
being oppressive, Steve Nerd.
Yeah, that's fine. But when Vince was on Howard, and Howard, who knows absolutely nothing about professional wrestling, just all hearsay and everything, it said, "So, are you gonna buy another wrestling company?" And Vince said, "That's the first time I heard it." I said, "Well, that's the plan." And that's the first time I heard that. The first time that I
Wow.
knew, oh my God, this is a reality. That 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 again, we this is infancy in internet, and I didn't have it
Wow.
yet. So I was like, oh, is this really going on? And I was at the mercy of the wrestling newsletters and whatever wrestling sites that were even, a thing at the time, and even then, the news wasn't 100% accurate. It was just from wrestling fans or people writing in and saying, "Oh yeah, I heard this. This happened at this house show." But yeah. So, but March 23rd, 2001, the war officially ended. WWE bought WCW.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. How many years ago is that now?
That was 2001. That was 19 years ago this week.
Jesus Christ.
Yep.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, you're not old at all.
No,
Uh,
great.
March 24th, 1973, a really important date in NWA history, which didn't seem so at the time, but turned out. March 24th, 1973, in Kansas City, Kansas, Harley Race defeated Dory Funk Jr. for the NWA Heavyweight Championship.
Huh.
Uh, this would be what at the time seemed to be a crazy upset because Jack Briscoe had been Dory Funk's most persistent challenger, and many assumed that Jack would eventually dethrone Dory for that NWA title, and it never happened. But here we are in Kansas City, and Harley Race defeats Dory Funk Jr. Um, and Harley would go on to only hold this title for a month before losing it to guess who? Jack Briscoe. Because Dory didn't want to drop it to Jack. And in shades of Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, Dory didn't want to do it in Texas. He didn't want to do it in Florida in Jack Briscoe's backyard. They wanted
He's a
Jack to be
grown man.
champion. They wanted to get the belt off Dory, who was champion, who had been champion for 2 years.
Oh, God. That's so
But in
funny.
in the weirdest way, Harley Race, for the longest time, was the shortest reigning NWA champion of all time. He held it for a month.
He's a grown
But
man.
but what we wouldn't know at this time was that when Harley Race defeated Dory Funk Jr. for the NWA title, a title that he would only hold for 57 days, that will be the first of 8 NWA title reigns.
Yeah.
And Harley Race, not Dory Funk Jr., not Jack Briscoe, Harley Race would be the man that would be synonymous with the NWA title, and whose legacy would outgrow both of those men that were seen as the pinnacles of the NWA. And Harley, for the longest time, had just been seen as a transitional champion. And like I said before, at one time the shortest reigning NWA champion, an afterthought. And
He's
now,
laughing now.
yes, Harley Race would win the NWA title for the first of 8 title reigns. Uh, March 24th, 1986,
Jesus.
in in Texas, Lance Von Erich would defeat Buddy Roberts for the World Class TV title on that date. I had to stick that in there because with the return of Dark Side of the Ring, uh, they replayed one of my favorite episodes of Dark Side of the Ring was the Von Erichs, the last of the Von Erichs. And one of the things that signaled the end of World Class was when they decided to
Lance?
introduce a new Von Erich, Lance Von Erich. Ricky Vaughn, who had been a top babyface in the Pacific Northwest, good, clean looking kid. That they just brought him in as Ricky Vaughn uh, to help out the Von Erichs. I don't think that he would have been just as over. The World Class had always been good at accepting new baby faces from other companies, namely Iceman King Parsons. Trying to think of the Fantastics. They've always been Chris Adams before he turned heel. They've always been accepting of new, baby faces. But Fritz thought another Von Erich that the only person that could be a huge heel in Texas had to be Von Erich. So Lance Von Erich, who fans already knew wasn't most world class fans knew wasn't a Von Erich, not by blood, not by any stretch of the imagination. But they try to pass him off as a Von Erich anyway. So to the educated world class fans who, like I said last week's wrestling historian, world class wrestling fans may have been the most not just passionate but invested fans in wrestling history because these wrestling in Texas is a generational thing. Wrestling in Texas it goes back to the 30s and 40s.
Yeah.
So the Von Erichs were these fans had seen these kids grow up literally. So they know who's a Von Erich and who's not. So you bring in this blonde-haired kid with a tan and call him Lance Von Erich, who's a cousin. You're just saying we think you're stupid. We just want your money. So we're going to call him Lance Von Erich, and you're going to act like he's a Von Erich. Give us your money. Um, but yeah, I had to throw that in there just because of uh,
Unreal.
the Von Erich. But yeah, Lance Von Erich was won the World Class Television Championship in 1986. March 24th, 1991. Speaking of WrestleManias that had to change their venues, I know it's happening right now as we speak, but March 24th, 1991 was WrestleMania 7. The original WrestleMania 7, because WrestleMania 6 had broken box office records, had not as big as WrestleMania 3, but in the Toronto Skydome had sold out 60,000 uh, seats. So they thought they could make it bigger. So WrestleMania 7 was going to be in the LA Coliseum, 95,000 strong. Figured they could sell it out. But two things they had working against them. Um,
Two things.
Business wasn't all that well, so ticket sales weren't exactly 91,000 people that were beating down their door to see WrestleMania.
No.
And also, Sergeant Slaughter, who was the number one heel in the company, was playing an Iraqi Iran sympathizer, and Operation Desert Storm was really in full swing at the time, and so that also wasn't the best thing for the WWE. So uh, there was, and according to the WWE, there was threats made against them uh, for the Sergeant Slaughter character. So, in the interest of safety, they moved the uh, the site of WrestleMania from the LA Coliseum to the LA Sports Arena. Was so whether you believe it was the lack of ticket sales or because of the Sergeant Slaughter gimmick as an Iraqi sympathizer that caused the move. This was the first time that a WrestleMania was moved their location. And so the WrestleMania 7 was held in the LA Sports Arena instead of the LA Coliseum. And other firsts during that card, Hulk Hogan defeated Sergeant Slaughter to regain the WWF Heavyweight Championship. The Ultimate Warrior defeated Randy Savage in a retirement match. Uh, and after Warrior had beaten Savage, Sensational Sherry would lay the boots, or in this case, the stockings, to Randy Savage. But who should jump out of the crowd to help her man but the returning Miss Elizabeth? Um, this was captured also in another episode of Dark Side of the Ring, the match made in heaven. Chronicle the life of Randy Savage and the marriage of Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth, and this was a turning factor in their relationship. But the return of Miss Elizabeth occurred at WrestleMania 7, and also making his debut, his WrestleMania debut on the undercard. The Undertaker would defeat Jimmy Snuka in his WrestleMania debut, and would start the longest streak in WrestleMania history.
Yeah.
That was number one of the eventual 21-0. And if that weren't enough, by God, don't you think it ought to be? I mentioned The Undertaker started his streak March 24th, 1991. Well, happy belated birthday to The Undertaker. March 24th was his birthday.
Your favorite wrestler of all time, Craig. He's your favorite.
Happy 55th, belated 55th birthday to Mark Calloway.
Your favorite.
Not the most overrated wrestler of all time, but certainly in the
No.
ballpark. No.
No.
Uh, but he wrestled Jimmy Snuka on his 25th birthday. So that had to be quite a thrill for him. But yes, happy 55th birthday to the Undertaker. Which brings me to today, Dan.
Boom. Yeah.
Uh, to on this date, I go on about territories and how you never know what you would expect. And certain cards in certain parts of the country, you can see uh, one card with wrestlers from different territories or different federations on the same card. I mentioned March 20th, 1978, you had Andre, Dusty, and Mil Mascaras, the three biggest box office draws that weren't champions on the same card at the same time. Well, March 25th, 1979, in Toronto, in the Maple Leaf Gardens, on the same card, the NWA Tag Team Champions. Listen to this now. Listen to these names. The NWA Tag Team Champions at the time were Paul Orndorff and Jimmy Snuka, and they
Okay.
defeated the Mid Atlantic Tag Team Champions, Ken Patera and Big John Studd.
Huh.
That same card, the NWA United States Heavyweight Champion Ricky Steamboat defeated Ric Flair. Now, you would think that would be the main event, but no. The main event on this card, Dan, was the WWF Heavyweight Champion Bob Backlund taking on the AWA Heavyweight Champion Nick Bockwinkel.
Huh.
They went to a 39-minute double countout. The first, last, and only time that a WWF champion took on an AWA champion one-on-one. Be the third Super Bowl of wrestling, and all took place in Toronto in an NWA building.
Wow.
So on one card, you had the WWF champion, the AWA champion, the United States heavyweight champion, the NWA tag team champions, and the Mid-Atlantic champions, all on the same card on one night. It took place today,
Wow.
March 25th, 1979, in Toronto, Canada.
They don't make them like they used to.
You imagine, Dan, if you go to Madison Square Garden and you see the AEW title defense and the NXT title defense and an Impact Zone champion all on the same card? Wouldn't that blow your mind? That's
My mind is blown listening about it. You know what I'm
Yes,
saying?
but that's the type of thing that happened, kids, back in the day when territories ruled the earth and where professional wrestling promoters wanted to please the fans and make a buck,
Make a
but
buck.
give
Yeah.
the fans
It's
what they
important.
wanted. So the NWA could have a card that featured WWF and AWA talent on the same night.
Insane.
Insane. And that, gentlemen and ladies, is called the Wrestling Historian.